What is going on, YouTube people? New York Cards and Comics here. Well, all you Patrick Mahomes investors, I am sure you are off to retirement. You've sold your cards. You are in the process of purchasing a nice private island somewhere. If you bought before the playoffs started, in the playoffs, dude won the Super Bowl, you're making bank right now, right? Right? Wait, you could barely cover your selling fees? But the guy won the Super Bowl. He did the thing. He literally did the thing. They like 5x'd, right? No? Well, what do you mean? I'm confused. Mahomes, the rocket ship, did not quite reach the moon. It barely didn't even get to the outer atmosphere. Let's talk a little Patrick Mahomes prices today. Super Bowls this past week. They obviously won. Dramatic game, fun game. First half was a little boring to watch. Halftime brought me back to my early college years. And then the second half was actually quite entertaining with the close of the game and the overtime, the whole 9 yards. Came out slightly ahead on gambling stuff. Nothing too crazy. But one Mr. Patrick Mahomes, hobby darling, won the Super Bowl as third. His price has soared, correct? Nope. Well, maybe for like 5 minutes. This over the last 30 days, we're going to look at a bunch of different stuff. I got a handful of cards pulled up here. We have his PSA 10 Silver Prism, PSA 9 Silver Prism, base Donruss, optic red and yellow, hashtag color match, and a base optic. Just to kind of give us a little bit of, I put the color match in instead of the optic hollow, just to kind of give us a little, a little bit of everything. Cover all our bases here on Patty Mahomes cards. So this is over. I went back to 121 on this one. So this was, right before the AFC and NFC championship games. Since that point, his more entry-level cards have gotten a pretty big increase. Not huge, but good. And, I'm going to use entry-level very loosely there because these cards are still pretty expensive. His base optic is up 41%. His red and yellow is up 20%. His base Donruss is up 35%. His PSA 9 silver is up 30%. His PSA 10 silver is only up 15 over the last, 20 some days. So if you were on the lower end stuff, you actually saw pretty decent bounces on that. The higher end, not so much. Now, we're just looking at, we're not looking at like crazy contenders autos and stuff like that, but more of the common man cards, if you will. So the PSA 10 silver got a little bump up. The 9 actually got a larger bump. When you look at an interesting, we don't use this very often in the old market movers. By the way, they redesigned a little bit. I'm getting used to things. They moved the percentages over to the right-hand side here instead of the bottom. From a content creation perspective, very nice because it puts everything on one screen. I don't have to scroll down anymore. Nice work, Teapot, and the rest of the team over there. If you want to check out Market Movers, link in the description down below. A tab I don't use very often, total sales dollars. This basically shows you how much sales happen on an individual day for each individual card. And when you chart this, boy, oh boy, something seemed to happen on February 11th. What could it have been? That's the Super Bowl. That is the day of the Super Bowl. And obviously, everything got massive spikes. We had 7 sales of PSA 10 silvers on Super Bowl Sunday alone. Average price, $4,000. PSA 9s, 16 sales. 37 sales of the optic base, 9 sales of the red and yellow, 7 sales of the Donruss. But clearly a massive jump up there. Why? And this is, let's talk about a few different things here. Let's go back to this real quick. This is why his cards aren't cracking over the 4K barrier. I mean, they're over it barely. You got a 15% increase on that PSA 10 silver. Congratulations, you can almost cover your eBay fees. And that's assuming, depending on how you bought it, what you're actually into it for. But what's going on here is, talk about this a bunch, it's very simple. Supply, demand. Everyone that has had these cards, and we're just going to talk Mahomes at a macro level. If you had Mahomes cards and you wanted to exit out of them for whatever reason, maybe you bought peak pandemic, you're taking a bath on it, and you're just trying to maximize every last little dollar out of it that you can. Maybe you bought it at the National. Maybe you got a good deal on one for 3K or 3.5K, and you want to make your couple $100, make your 10%, and move on to the next thing. Perfectly fine too. Anyone that does not want to actually own, and I'm going to use a word here that a lot of us might not understand, want to collect Patrick Mahomes cards, actually hold them, not just flip them, all those people are going to rush to try to exit out of them because they figure this is the most, and they are right about this. Liquidity wise, there's tons of buyers. The problem is there's tons of sellers as well. So what happens is all this inventory hits the market. There are buyers there waiting in open arms. You see little spike ups. But the problem is the supply outweighs the demand, or the supply can almost meet the demand, and that's where you see these jumps in the lower cards. Let's talk about that for a second. Why is it that the PSA 10 base optic went up percentage wise more than the silver? The silver, that's what everyone wants, is the silver. Here's your problem. A PSA 10 silver has a 4K price tag on it. You really limit your buying pool on that. When you stay at around $1,000 or less, and these cards were pushing that, I think it really opens you up to a much broader base buying pool. I've noticed this myself personally. Not even talking about Mahomes cards, but just cards in general. Every once in a while, maybe you trade into it, maybe you buy it, whatever the case might be, you end up with a higher dollar figure card, and then it looks all good. You keep it on your desk for a while. It's great. It's cool. And then you want to move off of it for whatever reason. You want to free up cash to buy something else. You want to trade out of it, whatever the case might be. And you go to move that card. It is difficult sometimes to move those $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 cards, unless you're traveling around the big shows all the time. And even then, it could be a little bit tricky. It's hard to find someone that wants to lay out that much money for a card with a picture of an athlete on it, encased in a piece of plastic with a number made up by some guy in California. When you think about that, try to move that for $4,000, it gets a little tricky. However, when you get to $1,000 and less, there's a lot more people that are willing to throw money around in that price range. If you're a Chiefs fan and you want to FOMO buy into a Mahomes card, you could justify it a little bit more to $1,000. That's why you see the bigger price bump on the PSA 9. There's more demand in those lower price ranges. And I know everyone likes to run to the 10s, but this is another good example of look at the percentages, not the dollar amounts. A lot of times you can make the same amount of money or more amount of money chasing the 9s, especially on stuff like this. Now, that's not going to work on a Ellie De La Cruz paper base from 2024 Top Series 1, but on these higher priced cards, you can get away with stuff like that. Let's look at some other, I want to look at some other time horizons. So this was essentially like if you bought in the middle of the playoffs. Let's look at another version of this. Same exact cards. Let's say you bought last year. You bought last year and you held. You're like, great. You won another one. Let's keep this party going. I'm buying in and we're holding. Oh my God, he won another Super Bowl. This is going to be fantastic. His cards have to be way up year over year. Well, not so fast, my friends. If you bought it last year's Super Bowl, maybe you FOMO bought in at last year's Super Bowl and now you're like, I got to get out of this. That was a mistake. So you were waiting for this year's Super Bowl. PSA 10 base, optic, up 4% year over year. Red and yellow, down 8% year over year. PSA 10 Donruss base, down 9% year over year. Silver PSA 10, down 15% year over year. And the silver 9, up 15% year over year. It just seems like the silver specifically just doesn't want to blow through that 4K barrier. Just can't sustain up there. It runs out of oxygen. It's got to come back down to earth a little bit. And you can see when you blow this out over the year, you had some sales right after the Super Bowl got all the way up to 5K. There's another sale there at 4.8, another one there at 4.6. And then once again, we're probably going to see the same thing play itself out here. This is immediately post Super Bowl last year, and then it starts to drop off, and then it kind of leveled out. We see this in early April. That card ended up sitting at around 3.6K. I would not be surprised if the Mahomes Silver PSA 10 Prism ends up back in the mid threes in a couple of months. It basically sat there all summer, bumped up a little bit as we moved towards the National in the beginning of football season, got back up over 4K, some 4.5s, some 4.6s. The season started, and, as good as Mahomes is, they had their struggles this year. It wasn't the prettiest picture they were painting over there in Kansas City, and his stuff got pretty cheap into season. This basically flattened out at around 3K. Now, if you bought in here, you're doing pretty okay today. You could turn that thing around for a nice $1,000 profit. Even if you sold it on eBay, you're going to make out even after eBay selling fees in the whole 9 yards. Or sell it in person. Maybe you get $3,700 cash for it or something. $3,600 cash, you make a quick $600. Call it a week. Then he jumped back up as the playoffs began to start, and people were like, "Oh, Mahomes back in the playoffs, Super Bowl run, yada yada yada." But year over year, you got nothing. You stayed exactly the same. Here is if you bought at the National. You were out there, Chicago, in the heat of it. You're buying, selling, trading, flipping, whole 9 yards. You decide to pick up a Mahomes Silver Prism. Football season's coming. You want to grab something. This is going to be it. What happened if you loaded up on Mahomes at the National? Silver PSA 9, up 26%. That seems to be the consistent big winner. PSA 10, up 10%. Not even covering your eBay fees. Donruss base, flat. Red and yellow optic, color match, up 15%. And base optic, up 15%. So you're basically flat. After eBay selling fees, you're flat. Or, maybe in a cash transaction, you're coming out ever so slightly ahead. But you've basically held. And once again, you can see that mid-season dip. This was the time to get in. I've said this for years. In a lot of cases, especially with football, sell at the National. You could probably buy back in season. In a ton of different cases, that would work out for you. Now, you still got to guess the right player or have a hunch on the right player. But selling off the National and then buying back into the card in season works a lot of the times if you really like the card. Remember, what do we say around here, ladies and gentlemen? They let you buy them back. There's no laws against it. The Panini and the Topps police, the hobby police, are not going to kick in your door if you sell them a Mahomes Silver Prism here in the summer and buy it back in September or October, or any card that you want. Michael Rubin doesn't come in and arrest you and send you to hobby prison for buying a card back that you sold. They let you do it. It's okay. Look at another one. 2 years. The thing I wanted to show here is obviously everything's down from 2021. You don't need a fancy chart and graph or me talking into a microphone in my basement to tell you that. Clearly, everything cratered. We know that. The interesting part that I kind of want to focus in on here is this has basically been a $4,000 card since June of 2022. So pre-national 2022, this card hit 4K. And then give or take 10% either way, it's gone up. There's been some sales at around 4,500. There's been some sales at around 3,500, and maybe even as low as 3K in season this year. But essentially, if you price banded this at 10% top and bottom, it would essentially stay flat since June of 2022. Since June of 2022, Patrick Mahomes Silver PSA 10 has basically stayed flat, and he's won 2 Super Bowls in that time span. File that away. Just let that, I want you to we're going to take a second. I just wanted to let that marinate in for a few seconds there. For 2 straight years, he's won Super Bowls. The only thing that is done is maintain his prices. He stayed flat winning 2 Super Bowls. Now, you could say, and it would be a decent argument, well, the sports card market has still been correcting since 2022. So him staying flat is actually a win. Okay. I'd be willing to, go back and forth with you on that argument. If he didn't win this Super Bowl, he'd be down quite a bit. That playoff run in Super Bowl, like I said, this was a 3K to under 3K card for a hot minute here around Christmas time. And then the playoff run bounced it back up. Where is this if he doesn't make the playoff run? They get bounced by the Ravens. I don't know. Scary to think about. But even with 2 rings, basically little to no bounce up. Last but not least, we'll wrap this puppy up. Check in on one Mr. Brock Purdy. Actually, has not dropped as much as I think, or as much as I thought he was going to. Now, we'll still need a little bit of time on this. Sometimes the downward swings take a little longer to see. He was basically going for much of the playoffs around $1,000, $900 to $1,000. You can see right here's the $1,000 line, pretty much sitting right at above or below that. Once again, within that kind of like 10% one way or the other, mostly slightly under that. Most recent sales, $750. Prior to or on the day of the game, $900, $860, $860, $875. There's a 1K right after the NFC Championship game. And then down to $750. So we'll have to see down about 17%. We'll have to see how this plays out as time moves on, as we move a couple more weeks after the Super Bowl. That's where we sit. The rocket ship of the rocket ship of Mahomes barely took off. Didn't get there. Did not get to the moon, sadly. As always, curious for your thoughts and comments down below. Catch you boys and girls on the next one. Peace.